Newsfirst at 9.
Hello, good evening and welcome to the news at 9. I'm Nadim Majid.
And I'm Sonali Manikavadage. We start off with a look at the stories making headlines tonight.
The headlines on Newsfirst at 9.
Milk powder prices to increase from midnight tonight. Assistant Secretary of State for South and Central Asian Affairs visits the north of Sri Lanka. Shots fired at the official residence of the OIC of the Ambilipitiya Police Crimes Division. Plans for consolidation of financial institutions need to be produced before the 31st of March. A statement from the Central Bank of Sri Lanka. Another passengerless vessel washes up ashore in Verugal.
Newsfirst at 9.
The price of milk powder is to be increased with effect from midnight tonight. Now, issuing a statement, Media Secretary to the Ministry of Cooperatives and Internal Trade, Nipuna Ekanayaka, noted that the price of a packet of 400 grams of milk powder will increase by 61 rupees.
That's right. Now, the price of a kilogram of milk powder will increase by 152 rupees rather. The release further notes that the Pricing Committee of the Consumer Affairs Authority reached this decision today after taking into consideration milk powder prices in the world. On our developing story tonight, U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for South and Central Asian Affairs, Nisha Desai-Biswal, says that patience is wearing thin with regard to progress in implementing the recommendations of the Lessons Learned and Reconciliation Commission.
Now, she made this statement during a media briefing convened this evening.
We reiterated our commitment to Sri Lanka, but we conveyed our concerns to senior government officials about the insufficient progress in addressing justice, reconciliation, and accountability. The United States has always supported a Sri Lankan process to resolve the issues emanating from the conflict. But as I have noted earlier, the patience of the international community is wearing thin with the pace of progress, including with the implementation of the recommendations of the LLRC. We are concerned about the worsening situation with respect to human rights, including continued attacks against religious minorities, as well as the weakening of the rule of law and an increase in levels of corruption and impunity. All of these factors lead to undermine the proud tradition of democracy in Sri Lanka. Furthermore, let me state that we are aware that in the past, individuals who have met with foreign officials have been met in turn with intimidating visits and threatening phone calls. I would say that we view this very seriously and find it completely unacceptable. I conveyed to senior officials that the United States is motivated here out of a vision for an inclusive, peaceful, prosperous, and unified Sri Lanka. It is this vision, this inclusive vision, which also motivates the United States to sponsor a third resolution in the United Nations Human Rights Council, calling on Sri Lanka to do more to promote reconciliation, democratic governance, justice, and accountability at the UN Human Rights Council in March. While it's too soon to say what the text will include, let me underscore that it will be carried out in the spirit of friendship with the Sri Lankan people.
Responding to a question raised by a journalist, the U.S. Assistant Secretary of State noted that discussions are not being carried out on imposing economic sanctions on Sri Lanka.
I have also very clearly noted that lack of progress in Sri Lanka has led to a great deal of frustration and skepticism in my government and in the international community. It has been the desire of many to provide space for the Sri Lankan people to come together to heal the wounds of war. But when that space is not used productively and aggressively to pursue peace and to pursue reconciliation, to pursue justice and accountability, then it draws the concern of the international community, and that is where we find ourselves. We are not at this point discussing sanctions. We are still very much committed to seeing progress on these issues. We believe that there is a desire within the Sri Lankan people to resolve the issues of the war and to move forward and to bring sustainable peace and prosperity for all Sri Lankans. And we want to work with Sri Lanka as it moves down that path.
Meanwhile, the U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for South and Central Asian Affairs also traveled to the northern province today.
During her tour of the north, she met with both religious leaders and civil activists.
The U.S. Assistant Secretary of State visited the Nallur Kandasamy Kovil this morning and later visited the Bishop of Jaffna, Reverend Thomas Soundaranayagam.
We need an investigation into how the war ended, which can be accepted by all people and which people can believe in. It is only then that people will be able to know details such as how many people disappeared, what happened to them and where they were taken to. We don't believe the investigation would be credible if it is held here. We believe this should be done from outside the country.
Journalists also raised questions on statements being made calling for the arrest of the Bishop of Jaffna.
If we have committed any wrong, then we don't mind being arrested and imprisoned. They are all getting together because they are unable to defeat this leadership. They can only destroy this country if this leadership is defeated. Aid is coming in from the foreign forces. That is why a lady also arrived in Sri Lanka recently. She will do what she is supposed to do. She is aiding the destruction of our country.
Meanwhile, the visiting diplomat also met with representatives of the TNA yesterday.
We engaged in discussions on a number of issues, including the implementation of the LLRC recommendations. The implementation of the recommendations put forward through the UNHRC resolutions in 2012 and 2013, as well as the removal of the military from the north and east. Does this American lady honestly feel sadness for the Tamil people? A wolf is shedding tears and the goats are getting wet. Does this wolf love the goats? Does it care for the goats? The she-wolf wants the goats to remain drenched. That is when he can make his move.
U.S. Assistant Secretary of State of South and Central Asian Affairs Nisha Biswal also met with the Minister of External Affairs Professor G.L. Piris yesterday. The meeting between the U.S. Assistant Secretary of State and the Minister of Economic Development Basil Rajapaksa took place yesterday as well.
There are various views in the country. The Northern Provincial Council is demanding for an investigation into alleged war crimes that took place in the country. We need to be strong and united to face this challenge. We need to rise up against this international conspiracy. Even though America exerts a substantial amount of pressure, there are plenty of countries who are prepared to support Sri Lanka to defeat this resolution.
In business news tonight, the Central Bank of Sri Lanka notes that banks and non-banking financial institutions are required to submit their preliminary proposals on the consolidation plan by 31st March 2014.
The Assistant Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, CJG Siriwardena, says that the consolidation process will not in any way affect the general public's current transactions and deposits with the banks and finance companies with whom they are presently dealing.
A master plan on the consolidation of the financial sector to create a stable financial sector with strong and dynamic financial institutions in order to steer Sri Lanka towards the economic goals set for 2016 and beyond were proposed in the recent budget. Accordingly, the Central Bank of Sri Lanka set out a roadmap for 2014 and beyond and has already commenced its preliminary processes. Thereby, banks and non-banking financial institutions will be consolidated in different ways. Banks and non-bank financial institutions that will be consolidated will be decided by the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, and the proposed plans need to be forwarded to the CBSL for approval. In addition, the Central Bank has requested all banks, NBFIs and others who are involved in the process to continue a close dialogue with the Central Bank and obtain guidance if the need arises. In this regard, the members of the special unit headed by the Assistant Governor were introduced to the banks and NBFIs to ease the process. Assistant Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, CJG Siriwardena, said that currently 58 banks and 21 non-bank financial institutions have been registered with the Central Bank. Siriwardena added that certain institutions have a stable monetary foundation while others are not in a position to face a financial crisis. He added that the consolidation effort will ensure the creation of a strong and sound monetary system. The Central Bank of Sri Lanka added that steps will be taken against those institutions that do not cooperate with the effort.
Moving on to more local news. Last night on the News at 9, we reported on a passengerless vessel which washed up on the Kathankudi beach in Batiklo. Officials believe that this vessel may have originated from Myanmar or Thailand. Now today, another passengerless vessel washed ashore in the Kadiraweli coast in Batiklo.
And that's right, Nadeem. Now, Batiklo District Deputy Director of Fisheries, Domenico George, said that the vessel washed ashore this morning.
The Batiklo District Deputy Director attached to the Ministry of Fisheries noted that the 30-foot-long vessel is believed to have a structure similar to the vessel used in Myanmar. The Ministry of Fisheries notes that a stock of dried fish, an empty bag, a black t-shirt and several empty cans were discovered from the vessel.
I've never seen a vessel like this before in my life. We are not sure why such vessels are washing up our shores. When we set out to sea at 6 in the morning, we saw that vessel drifting. Within an hour and a half, it washed ashore.
Incidents of abandoned vessels washing ashore on the Lankan coast were reported from Point Pedro, Parliament Madu and Kathankudi. The Deputy Director of Fisheries in the Batiklo district said that the high-ranking officials attached to the Ministry of Fisheries are aware of these incidents. The Ministry of Fisheries adds that they have informed the government of Myanmar as well as the Sri Lankan Navy of these incidents. Speaking to Newsfirst, the Sri Lankan Navy said that rough seas caused such abandoned vessels to wash up Lankan shores.
We are going to conduct a special investigation, especially why these Myanmar citizens, why they are arriving in Sri Lanka, what are the reasons, whether it's a human trafficking racket or any other reasons. Further investigations are being continued at the moment.